The day I finished my new video on springs, what the hell is a Newton per millimeter? You are going to want to change your spring too. And that's a beautiful thing. But before you go rushing off to hire some shop to do the work for you, let me suggest 3 simple things. 1, you can do it. And I'm about to show you how to take the shock out, how to remove the spring, put it back together. Everything's going to be great. 2, the amount of money that you'd have to pay a shop or a person to do the work for you is probably similar to the amount of money that you might have to spend to get 2 simple tools in order to do the work yourself. The difference is you'll be able to do work like this in the future forever, where if you hire a shop, you're back at ground zero. Number 3, working on your bike yourself, for some reason, there's something different about it. It like creates this bond. Remember how Rossi in MotoGP used to always put his own stickers on? Like, there's this connection. I don't mean to sound too spiritual, but it really is true. I feel different about a bike that I've worked on myself, that I've cleaned and I've adjusted the chain, and I know it. I know what's beneath me. And that's kind of a special thing. So, you know, we're all about sharing here. So let's share that special thing too. I'm Gogo for SuperDuke.com. Well, let's change this shock and spring. The first thing I have to say about taking a shock out of a Gen 3 and a Gen 4 Super Duke is they're a little weird, right? If you use common sense like I did, you might break the bike like I did. And it's, at least back in the day when I did it for the first time, there was nothing in the manual about how to take the shock out. I even called the dealership. They're like, it doesn't say anything. We don't know. So I used common sense and I broke the bike. And here's why. I 3D printed a larger version of the frame and the shock to help illustrate what goes on here. It's a little tricky. So here's the frame. And this is the left side of the bike, like the kickstand side of the bike, and this is the right side of the bike. So if you look over here, you'll see there's just a regular bolt, right? And so I 3D printed a bolt and I 3D printed an Allen wrench, and if you put this in here, it comes out. On the bike, it's actually not an Allen, it's a Torx, right? So, but I couldn't 3D print a Torx, so I'm using an Allen instead. So, you would think that the way to take this shock out of this frame is to just undo the bolt, right? But the thing is, the shock has to fit inside the frame really snug. It doesn't want to be bouncing around. And if you look right now, it's tight as hell right now. So KTM often uses these like slider pieces, like there'll be an insert in here that's slides in and out of the frame so that when you tighten the bolt, you know, the insert slides here and it holds the shock in place. That's the way it works on the Gen 1 and Gen 2. But the Gen 3, I told you, it's a little bit twisted. So if you look on this side, there's a huge Allen, and it really is an Allen. It's not a Torx in this case. So I 3D printed a huge Allen that goes into here. So you would think that the way to take the shock out is just to undo this bolt, right? And if you do this, if you undo the bolt and you go and you just pull it out, look, the shock is still in there. It's still in there tight. You cannot get it out. It's really, really tight. That's because the insert that's in this frame does not slide back and forth. It threads back and forth. And the really odd thing is, it's reverse thread. So let's say you take this bolt out, right? Take this bolt out, and now you want to take the shock out. You have to actually insert an Allen into here and tighten it. It's going to feel like you're tightening it, right? And then it just comes right out. Then it becomes loose. Because if you look at this, what's happening here, can you see in here? See this? If you look closely, when I tighten this, like this is as tight as it goes, right? And it's all the way flat against here. That's just the way the bike works. That's exactly how the bike works. If I loosen it, look what happens. See how the insert sticks out, it goes farther out into the center. That's how the shock is held in place securely. So the shock slides in and it goes against this wall of the frame. Really nice and snug, right? Then this moves in and actually pinches the shock in place. So you don't really do it in that order. What I do is I'll put the shock in, right? And I'll take the bolt and put it in, and I'll start threading the bolt so that the shock is kind of held in place, right? Just loosely, the shock isn't gonna fall out. Then I take this and loosen it, right? Reverse thread it like this, and now it's gonna snug the shock into place. Now it's snug, now it's not moving. Then you tighten the bolt the rest of the way, like that. And you can, retorque this and loosen a little bit more, make sure nothing loosened up. But if you turn this backwards, it's gonna squeeze the shock, and when you turn this standard thread, it's gonna tighten the bolt. So that's how the shock comes out and goes back in. It's twisted, I know. This whole reverse thread thing, I'm dyslexic. So I screw it up every single time I do it. I'm like, wait, what? Which direction? So I mentioned there's 2 tools you might need to buy in order to take the shock out and replace your spring. One is you really need to be able to jack the bike up and suspend the rear suspension, not like this bike is now. Most of us have a rear stand because slides into the axle and picks the rear of the bike up and holds it, upright. Nice and secure too. This is pretty strong. The problem is the weight of the bike is still on the swing arm. So if we unbolted the shock right now, the whole bike would collapse. That's not cool. So you need to be able to suspend the rear of the bike. Also, when you're installing a Sport Link or a Super Link, you also have to suspend the bike. And in order to measure the ride height, you need to suspend the rear of the bike in the air. So how do you do that? I sell this. These are called Super Jacks. And you slide them into the frame on this side, and you slide them into the frame on this side. And now you have a very simple way of jacking the bike up. You put one jack stand there, you put one jack stand there, and now the suspension is suspended. I had a customer of mine send me a picture of his Super Duke hanging from a tree. That's how he suspended the suspension. And I think that's fantastic. I can't say that I haven't done that myself, but this is way better because hanging from a tree, it's a little tipsy and it's just, it's hanging from a tree. So Super Jacks are a very simple way to suspend the rear of the bike in a secure, strong way. Like my bike has foldable foot pegs. Some people have foot peg stands with solid foot pegs, but your street bike has foldable foot pegs, and my race bike has foldable foot pegs. So how do you jack it up then? Super Jacks. So that's the first challenge that we've met as far as tools, right? The next challenge is how do you compress the spring? I have no association with Motion Pro, but I do have their spring compressor. I think I got mine on Amazon for $185 or something like that. It's a very simple tool. And you may feel like, wow, that's a lot of money, but you buy this thing once and you never have to pay someone to change your spring again. Or your friend's springs and all that stuff. Maybe a couple of guys get together and you can split it. So this equals freedom for me. I can't tell you how many times I was at a racetrack and I needed to change my spring and I couldn't because nobody was there with a spring compressor. Like sometimes suspension guys will come to the track and they have spring compressors, but not all the time. And if someone doesn't have a spring compressor, you can't change your spring. So having this tool for me is so valuable. It's like freedom. It feels freedom because I can do whatever I want, whenever I want, and you can too. So there's the two tools that you need. Now let's get this job done. Okay, the top bolt of the shock is either a 13mm socket or it's a Torx. I forget what size Torx it is, but it freaks me out. There's a lot of stress on this bolt, so I'm always afraid that the Torx is going to strip or something. So let's use a 13mm socket here. So you just reach in here and, okay. Just gonna turn it a couple of times. So now for the other side, that big Allen I was talking about, it's a 14mm. And remember, this is the twisted one. This is the one that we do reversed. So same thing, stick it in the same hole on the other side of the bike. Where are you? Come on now. There you go. Now I want to tighten this, right? So I want to tighten it and see it's getting looser. So just do a couple of turns, right? Because you'll see it'll stop. Now it doesn't go anymore. That means it's backed all the way out. The mistake that I made is I just kept going. I was like, I just kept going and I stripped it and I broke it because I'm an idiot. All right, now this is really simple. Down here, I have a Super Link installed, but it's the same thing, right? So your link, whether you have the OEM one or a Sport Link or a Super Link here, you just only have to undo this forward bolt that holds the shock. You don't have to do all these. You can just do this one itself. It might help to loosen them when you want to put the shock back in, but watch, I'll do it right now with just only doing this one. So I'm going to go the other side and undo this nut. Just undo this nut. Okay, but before I take this bolt out, we have to realize that this shock, it still has both bolts in top and bottom, and it's actually holding the swing arm in the air. If I could all of a sudden pop the shock out, the swing arm would fall to the ground. So we don't want that happening. So let's take this bolt and loosen it the rest of the way, okay? It actually turns quite a few times. Come on now. I think that's all the times that it takes. Now this is another trick, okay? That bolt is loosened and it's out of the threads, but it's still holding the shock in place. So I'm gonna take this screwdriver and I'm gonna slide it through the other side, and that's gonna push the bolt out because it's kind of hard to reach in there and get it, and it's gonna keep the bike from collapsing. So watch this. And at the same time, if I just put a little weight on this, see how I'm taking the stress off the shock? So I'm gonna find the hole, take the stress off the shock, and just pull the bolt out. Now it's all hanging on the screwdriver, which is great, right? So now if you can, same way, you wanna take the stress off of the shock and then pull that bolt out. So watch this. I'm gonna lift this up a little bit and take this bolt out. Now slowly lower the bike. Okay, so now the tire is on the ground. And guess what? If I reach and get the screwdriver, pull the screwdriver out, there's a shock. It wasn't hard, right? But it was a little tricky. So if you don't know those little tricks, it could be like, what is happening here? Now, how do you take the spring off? Okay, so here is my Olin shock out of my Super Duke. Obviously, the OEM shock is a WP, but all shocks kind of do this the same, right? You have to compress the spring, and it's held by this retainer right here. So we want to compress the spring so we can take off the retainer, and then we can remove the spring. But the spring is under pressure, right? So this is a little bit dangerous. You don't want to catch your fingers in anything. So how do you compress the spring? Here's how you compress the spring. You take this little tool, and this Motion Pro tool has these little plates that you can rotate in and out to get to be exactly the right size so that they go around the spring retainer and just push against the shoulder of the spring. So I have mine set up already to the right size. It goes like this. Now, of course, there's a pin that holds the tool in the right place, which I've lost a long time ago. So I just use an Allen. Okay, so what we want to focus on right now is making sure that the plates here are not touching the spring retainer, and they're just holding the spring itself, the yellow spring itself. And at this point, we can tighten this nut, and it's going to start compressing the spring, which is a beautiful thing. So if I take this wrench and I start tightening this nut, I'm going to... Oh, the other thing that's kind of cool about using an Allen, see what just happened? Like I turn this and then the Allen touches this bar. So I don't have to hold that. That's kind of cool. So now I'm just turning this. And each time I turn it, if you look close, you see I'm kind of creating a little bit of a gap here. It's compressing the spring, which is what we need. So we got to go a little more. Try to keep your fingers out of the way, because if the thing popped off, you don't want to pinch your fingers. That would suck. I bet you this is far enough. So the next trick is there's a little retaining clip that's hidden inside here. So what you need to do is push that down, right? And then we get this little clip out. Where is it? So there's a, oh, there you go. See? I hope you can see them. My big fingers aren't in the way. So now that this clip is off, I can pull it off completely. Now we can just turn the spring back out, loosen it. So watch us do that. Beautiful. All right, now we pull out the Allen. Come on, boys. Take off the tool, and we now have a shock that's ready to pull the spring off. On the Olins, you can't get it off because these little spacers are there. So you just take one off, take this off, take this off, take your spring off. There you go. And you know, obviously putting the spring back on is the same thing in reverse. Put the spring on, put the little retaining ring there, put this here. I'm gonna put this back in, put the tool back on, get our Allen in the right way. All right. Now this is really important when you're putting it back together. You really, once again, we want to make sure that the tool is pushing on the spring only. But the other thing you got to make sure of is that this retaining ring stays in its little home, because as we compress the spring, we have to get this to slide over the body of the shock in just the right way. And sometimes as you compress the spring, this ring will hit the side of the shock and then pop out of place. So we're gonna go down like this. I'm just doing it with my fingers actually right now, it's not hard. But you see how it's popping up a little bit? It's gonna happen more. Okay, now you can see it's popping up, right? So while the spring doesn't have that much pressure on it, you gotta move it around a little bit so it sticks in. Then I'm noticing that you can do like 2 turns. So you do 1 and 2, and then make sure that this ring is still seated. It seems to be still seated. There we go. 1 and 2. And then make sure this is still seated. I don't know if it is. Oh, there you go. Okay, so it's still seated. Now, once again, 1 and 2. Be patient. $185 for this tool, and I think it works brilliantly. It's a little bit awkward. 1, 2. All right, now we can see the little slot for the retaining ring to go on. So there's a little cut in it, obviously. I'll stretch it out, go over here. Okay, it's on. Now, we can return. That was my funny moment, and it was not funny. Okay, there you go. Pull out the Allen. And you just replaced your own spring. Now, there's preload adjustment that we can talk about and sag adjustment that we will talk about. And this is gonna come up in the spring video that I talked about. But right now, wasn't that hard, was it? Okay, so now we're putting the shock back in. This is very basic, it's simple stuff. Just throw it in, align it in between your link there. It's very simple. Find your little bolt. Take the top of the shock, line the top of the shock up so it's in the hole about lined up. Put this bolt in and just make it snug, right? So, okay, it's snug. Then, again, this, using the rear stand, you see how it lines up the shock? Like I'm lifting the stand up and down, and there you go. That's simple as that. Put the washer on here. Put the nut on here. And then torque these up. I think these get torqued to 80 newtons. I think that's the number for these. But right now, we don't want to make this bolt tight until first we, remember that odd insert, the reverse thread insert. So let's go to the other side. Take our 14 millimeter Allen. Where'd the extension go? Hello? Oh, here's the extension. Now we want to go to the other side, take our 14 millimeter Allen, and this is the twisted part. It's in here. From my perspective, this is loosening, right? So we're loosening, but we're actually pushing that insert in until it hits the shock. Right? It's gonna hit any second now. Ready? There it is. Now it's smushing the shock, right? It's making it tight, perfectly centered in that frame. I'm sure there's a torque spec on that. I don't know what it is though. But that's about how tight I make it. Now we go back to this side with the 13 millimeter, and we really tighten it, right? See how many more times you had to spin it, okay? And torque this to spec. I don't know what the torque is off the top of my head, but I'll put it in the description, the torque of all these bolts. But watch, just to check, okay? I'm gonna go back to the other side and see, like, did that insert back out possibly? So what I should be able to do is, like, loosening it, right? Look how tight it is. It didn't loosen at all. That's because when you screw a standard thread into a reverse thread, they tighten each other. So that's a beautiful thing. So there you go. Oh, last thing. Lift the bike back on the stand. Take out your jack stands. And pull out your super jacks. So there you go. Your shock is changed, your spring is changed, and you feel this bond with your motorcycle. I'm telling you, it's a thing. If you haven't experienced already, it's a thing. So this is all brought to you after buying 2 simple tools rather than hiring some shop to do it. I use the Motion Pro one. I don't care if you do. I'm not connected to them at all. And the Super Jack. I am connected to these. I make these. I sell these on superduke.com. They work with the Gen 3, the Gen 4, and the Gen 1 and Gen 2. You simply slide them in, slide a standard jack stand underneath them, and work on your rear suspension. It's beautiful. I'm Gogo for superduke.com, and I hope this helps.